For more than half a century, Carol Burnett was the face of laughter in America. Who could make a woman, defined by grace, admit to wounds that never quite healed? For years, they were the creative heartbeat of CBS, the network's golden couple. She was the warmth, he was the order. Their partnership seemed unbreakable until ambition began to outgrow affection. They met in 1960 when Burnett was still a young performer on The Gary Moore Show. Joe Hamilton was already a respected television producer, or 10 years her senior, polished, composed, and quietly magnetic. In interviews, Burnett described the moment she first saw him. He looked at me in a way that made me feel like I truly mattered. 3 years later, they married in a small California ceremony, attended only by close friends and colleagues. By 1967, when The Carol Burnett Show premiered, Joe had become both her husband and her producer. Their dynamic was legendary. She brought spontaneity, he brought discipline. The answer lay not in one name, but in many. The chemistry between them defined the tone of American television comedy for a decade. As the ratings climbed and the awards accumulated, the Hamiltonation-Burnett household became a symbol of success built on partnership. But in Hollywood, even the most brilliant alliances eventually fracture under the weight of control. According to costume designer Bob Mackie, trouble began when Hamilton started taking a little too much charge. He wanted to approve scripts, dictate the guest list, even edit sketches before Carol saw them. At first, she tolerated it. But as time passed, the collaboration began to feel more like management. "Joe forgot I wasn't one of his shows," she once said. The tension seeped into their home life. Long nights at the studio became longer silences at dinner. They were men who once shaped her life, co-stars, collaborators, lovers, and gatekeepers of an era where power often drowned out respect. Friends noticed her smile grow thinner, more practiced. By 1979, TV Guide ran a cryptic piece hinting that a veteran producer was involved in a private relationship inside a Los Angeles editing suite. No names were printed, but the whispers were unmistakable. Carol stayed silent. Loyalty came naturally to her, even when loyalty hurt. But silence, in this case, became complicity. In 1982, while reviewing contracts, Burnett's lawyer discovered that Hamilton had quietly registered a production company in Beverly Hills owned Hamilton Productions, holding rights to several spin-offs based on The Carol Burnett Show. One of them, Mama's Family, was derived directly from a sketch Burnett had co-created. Her name, however, was nowhere to be found on the paperwork. When confronted, Hamilton's reply was cold. Some had wounded her in private, others in public. "It's business, Carol, not emotion." That sentence, she would later say, ended the marriage more surely than any affair ever could. On March 3, 1983, Burnett filed for divorce in Los Angeles County Court. The Los Angeles Times headline was simple, almost sterile: Carol Burnett and Joe Hamilton split. But behind the formality was one of Hollywood's most bitter legal battles. Hamilton demanded full production rights, including profits from syndication. Burnett countered for joint ownership. The courtroom became their new stage, each day an act of restraint and regret. Reporters from Variety and People lined the courthouse steps. Fans waited outside, holding letters of support. Some through arrogance, others through quiet exclusion. Inside, Burnett sat quietly, her hands folded, while Hamilton looked increasingly worn. They rarely spoke, and if, after nearly a year, the verdict came, Burnett retained rights to her shows, name, and creative legacy. Hamilton received 40% of future syndication profits. When asked how she felt, she told People magazine, "We were the best team until he forgot I was more than a partner." The quote appeared on the magazine's cover and became one of the most repeated lines of her career, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. After the ruling, Burnett walked out of the courthouse alone. A small group of fans clapped. She waved, smiled, and kept walking. That night, she didn't go to dinner with friends or colleagues. She went home, ordered Chinese food, and watched reruns of her show on CBS. Together, they told a story larger than personal resentment, a story about how Hollywood treats women who dare to lead with warmth instead of war. It was, as she later described, a strange comfort to see myself still laughing. Hamilton remarried shortly after and produced a few smaller shows, none of which matched his earlier success. He died in 1991 of heart disease. Burnett did not attend the funeral. She sent white flowers with a note that read, "I wish you peace, Joe. As for me, I'll keep going." The message was simple, but it carried everything she never said aloud. Decades later, in an interview at the Paley Center for Media, a journalist asked her how she survived that period. Burnett paused before answering. "Love teaches you what laughter never can. That trust is the hardest thing to rebuild once it breaks." From that day on, she refused to mix business with affection. Harvey Korman, the trusted partner who once made her laugh more than anyone, became the source of her deepest professional heartbreak. She became meticulous, cautious, and quietly protective of her name, the same name that had built an empire of joy. But even as her personal life stabilized, the outside world continued to test her composure. Fame, as she would discover next, has a way of inviting violation, and the next man who would cross that boundary did so not in a boardroom or courtroom, but in the middle of the night. It was July 1972. The hills of Coldwater Canyon were quiet, the city below sleeping under a thin veil of smog and starlight. Inside her home, Carol Burnett had finally gone to bed after a long day of rehearsals. Her daughters were asleep. The house was still. Then, sometime past 3 in the morning, the phone rang. Joe Hamilton, the man she loved and married, betrayed her in business and in faith. At first, her housekeeper thought it must be an emergency from CBS. But when Burnett picked up, still half drowsy, she froze. The voice on the other end was unmistakable, deep, deliberate, with that strange mix of authority and mystery the world had come to recognize. "Carol, it's Marlon Brando." For a moment, she thought it was a prank. Brando was, after all, the most famous man in Hollywood. He had just conquered the world as the Godfather, and his reputation for eccentric behavior was already legend. But as the voice went on, referencing an episode of the Carol Burnett show he had just watched, she realized it was indeed him. What began as polite conversation quickly drifted into something else. Brando talked about acting, about truth, about the difference between television laughter and cinematic art. Marlon Brando, a symbol of male brilliance, reduced her to a late-night anecdote. Then his tone softened. He began complimenting her voice, her eyes, her warmth. He said television needed more women like her. His words lingered, too personal, too late at night. Burnett would later describe the moment in one simple sentence. He was brilliant, but dangerous. After 30 minutes, she cut in gently but firmly. "Mr. Brando, it's very late. I have an early call tomorrow." Then she hung up. Cary Grant, the gentleman of old Hollywood, turned her into the punchline of his own vanity. She assumed that was the end of it. By morning, it was on the front page. The Hollywood Reporter blared the headline, "Marlon Brando calls Carol Burnett at 3:00 a.m." The Los Angeles Herald-Examiner followed with, "Brando finds inspiration in CBS's Comedy Queen." Gossip columnists Luella Parsons and Rona Barrett described the conversation as flirtatious. Some claimed it lasted more than an hour. Others hinted that Brando had called again days later. CBS issued a statement calling it a private call between colleagues. But by then, the story had a life of its own. Burnett's publicist fielded dozens of inquiries. Her gentle smile, her graceful posture, and her unmistakable voice had come to symbolize something rare in Hollywood: sincerity. And Lorne Michaels, architect of modern television comedy, excluded her from the stage she helped make possible. Her friends advised her to ignore it. But ignoring humiliation does not make it vanish, it only teaches others that it is safe to repeat. According to Vicki Lawrence, Burnett was quietly furious. Over lunch at Musso and Frank Grill, she said, he crossed a line. You don't call a woman at 3 in the morning to compliment her show. Brando, when asked about it, dismissed the incident with a smirk. Carol takes things too seriously, he reportedly told a friend. It was just a conversation. The remark only deepened her resentment. What the public did not know was that Burnett, already struggling through the pressure of her show's 8th season, felt personally violated, and not romantically, but professionally. Each encounter chipped away at the illusion that kindness was protection. The idea that her name, her brand of wholesome comedy, could be dragged into Brando's myth of seduction enraged her. For someone who had built a career on dignity and control, the rumor represented everything she despised about Hollywood's male entitlement. After that, she began setting new boundaries. She instructed her PR team never to schedule events that included Brando. For years, an internal CBS memo circulated quietly: avoid pairing Burnett and Brando on public panels or award shows. At the 1974 AFI Awards, when Brando appeared unexpectedly on the red carpet, Burnett turned and walked away before photographers could capture them together. The image, her crimson gown retreating into a sea of flashes-sand, became symbolic. Hollywood's kindest woman refusing to be reduced to a story she never asked for. Behind closed doors, though, the incident left a mark. She became more private, more cautious, less willing to trust the spontaneity she once prized. After that, a former assistant recalled, she stopped answering the phone after midnight. Each wound revealed that even in a world built on laughter, there are hierarchies that humor alone cannot erase, no matter who it was. The irony was cruel. Burnett had survived on connection, on the belief that laughter could bridge any distance. Now, she learned that even laughter could be misread when power entered the room. Years later, Brando's biographers would include the incident as a curious footnote in his long list of eccentricities. But for Burnett, it was not anecdota, it was boundary. It was the moment she decided that respect must be defended, even at the cost of reputation. In one interview decades later, when asked if she ever forgave Brando, she paused and said, "I forgave the man, but I never forgot the tone." That tone of the casual arrogance of a man who thought admiration excused intrusion would echo again in her next public humiliation. Burnett's story is not about bitterness. It is about endurance. Only this time, it would not come through a phone line at night, but across a crowded ballroom filled with cameras and applause. And the man responsible was not a stranger, but a legend, Cary Grant. Hollywood in 1968 was a cathedral of glitter. The Beverly Hilton Hotel, drenched in golden light and champagne, hosted a galaxy of stars: Elizabeth Taylor, Jack Lemmon, Lucille Ball, Gregory Peck. The air shimmered with applause and ego. That night, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association was honoring Cary Grant with a Lifetime Achievement Award, an ode to an era of refinement and charm. Carol Burnett attended as one of the new faces of television comedy, bright, gracious, and, in the eyes of the old guard, perhaps a little too accessible. Her show on CBS had just won an Emmy and was redefining what comedy could look like, not elitist, but human. She was, as Time magazine wrote, the people's laughter. After the ceremony, Burnett approached Grant's table to congratulate him. About what it costs to remain kind when kindness is mistaken for submission. She was radiant in a deep red gown designed by Bob Mackie, her signature smile softening the formal air of the ballroom. A film director seated beside Grant and hoping to bridge the generational gap remarked, "Cary, have you seen Carol's show? The whole country loves it." Grant smirked. His tone was smooth, but his words carried a sting. "Oh, that show, the one where she waves her arms, makes faces, and overacts? I don't understand why people enjoy that sort of thing." The laughter around the table faltered. Glasses froze halfway to lips. Burnett's smile held for a moment longer, then changed age, almost imperceptibly from amusement to composure. About how a woman can forgive the world and still refuse to forget its cruelty. Without raising her voice, she replied, "Maybe people prefer laughing with real folks rather than with perfection. The silence that followed was electric. Grant blinked, offered a tight smile, and turned away. Burnett set down her glass, nodded politely, and left the table. Roger Ebert, who attended the event, later wrote that the room seemed to inhale and hold its breath. By the next morning, the Los Angeles Times had run a brief headline, "Cary Grant and Carol Burnett, Frost at the Beverly Hilton." It was a small item, but the implications rippled through the industry. To many, Grant represented the last polished gentleman of Hollywood's golden age. Burnett symbolized its emerging conscience, a new kind of entertainer who valued authenticity over poise. His jab was more than personal. It was generational. Because behind the laughter that defined a generation lies another story, a quieter, sharper truth. CBS, aware of public sentiment, released a subtle statement the following week. Carol Burnett represents humor that is humane and intelligent, laughter born from empathy, not pretense. The words were polite but unmistakably pointed. Grant, when pressed for comment, only deepened the divide. In a later Variety interview about television comedy, he said, "I prefer a more refined humor, something closer to European style. Television these days tries too hard to be funny." He did not name her. He did not have to. Public reaction was swift. TV Guide reported a surge of viewer letters, most of them from women in Infeston, defending Burnett. One wrote, "If Cary Grant wants refinement, he can keep it. The woman who taught America how to smile had to learn again and again how to keep smiling when the world around her turned cruel. We want heart." Burnett, true to form, said nothing. She did not retaliate on air, nor make jokes at his expense. Instead, she did what she always did. She worked. She worked. That season, The Carol Burnett Show reached its highest ratings in history. In a quiet act of poetic justice, she invited Lucille Ball to appear in a special episode. The best response, Lucy later said, was to let them turn on the TV and still see us there. But the memory lingered. When Paramount Pictures later offered Burnett a co-starring role opposite Grant in a 1970 musical, she declined, citing scheduling conflicts. Privately, she told a friend, "I won't work with someone who looks down on women's laughter." And now, for the first time, she is telling it all. Years later, in the biography Cary Grant, A Class Apart, one of Grant's confidants recalled him admitting, "Carol is such a smart, strong woman. She made me uneasy." The irony was almost cinematic. The man who built his career on grace had been disarmed by a woman whose grace did not need validation. For Burnett, the incident became a lesson. Dignity could be as loud as anger, sometimes louder. She did not need to humiliate him in return. The world would do that for her, one rerun at a time. By the early 1970s, as Grant retreated into semi-retirement, Burnett's influence only grew. Her sketches, Ordinary Women, Housewives, Secretaries, Dreamer Sound, became America's mirror. Her laughter was never cruel, it was connective. In a business obsessed with control, she chose vulnerability and made it look powerful. In the 1970s, The Carol Burnett Show was not merely entertainment, it was ritual. Still, she never forgot that night. It was, as she would later confide, the moment I realized the spotlight does not protect you, it exposes you. That awareness would soon harden into resolve, because the next slight would not come from an individual man's arrogance, but from an entire institution. For nearly 50 years, one of television's most powerful figures, Lorne Michaels, creator of Saturday Night Live, would quietly exclude Carol Burnett from the very stage she helped make possible. And this time, it would not be a remark at a party. It would be an absence so loud it echoed through generations of comedy. If Harvey Korman tested her patience, Joe Hamilton broke her trust, and Cary Grant wounded her pride, then Lorne Michaels, without a wordie, challenged her very place in history. For nearly 50 years, Carol Burnett, the woman who turned sketch comedy into art and made empathy her brand, was never once invited to host Saturday Night Live. Not in the 1970s when her show reigned supreme. Not in the 1980s when nostalgia revived her legend, and not even in the decades that followed when the industry owed its lineage to her. It was, by all accounts, one of television's most glaring omissions. She was not just a performer, she was a comfort. Every Saturday night, millions of Americans tuned in to watch a woman in a velvet gown transform awkwardness into grace and laughter into art. When SNL premiered in October 1975, Burnett was still America's comedy queen. The Carol Burnett Show had just entered its 8th season and was still CBS's top-rated variety program. Critics, eager to connect the old and the new, openly wondered whether Burnett would appear as one of the show's first hosts. Harriet Van Horn of the New York Post even suggested that having her on SNL would bridge the golden age of television with the rebellious spirit of its future. But inside NBC's Studio 8H, that idea never made it past the conference table. According to Liv from New York, Back Bay Books 2002, one production editor recalled Michaels dismissing the suggestion outright, "She's the face of old television. We're doing something new." That single sentence would define a half-century of silent exclusion. Burnett never commented publicly, but the omission did not go unnoticed. By 1981, journalist Tom Shales wrote in The Washington Post that Burnett had expressed interest in hosting yet never received a response. At her side stood Harvey Korman, the man whose impeccable timing and dry humor formed the backbone of the show's success. Fans flooded NBC with letters demanding to know why the nation's most beloved female comedian was ignored. NBC's reply was bureaucratic, almost sterile. Guest hosts are chosen based on each season's content and tone. Few believed it. Behind closed doors, NBC insiders admitted that Michaels viewed Burnett's brand of humor, warm, sentimental, humanian, as the antithesis of SNL's youthful satire. To him, she represented a world where comedy was collaborative, not competitive, where kindness was part of the craft, not a weakness. To Burnett, the silence spoke louder than rejection. It revealed the quiet cruelty of an industry that rewarded irony but punished sincerity. During a 1989 appearance on Larry King Live, when asked about never hosting SNL, she smiled and said, "Maybe I'm just not edgy enough for them." The audience laughed, but the smile she gave afterward carried the weight of 50 years. Together, they were unstoppable. Two halves of a perfect rhythm. By the 1990s, Michaels' decision had become an unspoken industry myth, a kind of institutional snub everyone recognized but no one discussed. In 1990, a former editor told Rolling Stone that Michaels once rejected a proposal to include Burnett in the SNL 10th anniversary special, saying, "We respect her, but that's not our kind of comedy." That remark as casual, dismissive first cemented what everyone already knew. Carol Burnett wasn't just overlooked, she was deliberately erased from a conversation she helped create. Still, she refused bitterness. At a Television Academy event in 1991, both Burnett and Michaels were invited to speak on separate panels. According to journalist Bill Carter of the New York Times, when Burnett entered the stage, the audience rose in a standing ovation that lasted nearly 2 minutes. Minutes later, when Michaels appeared, Burnett remained seated, smiling faintly. Cameras captured the moment. Entertainment Tonight dubbed it the coldest look in Hollywood. She never addressed it, but perfection has a way of concealing pressure. She didn't need to. The years went on. Generations of SNL starsen, Tina Fey, Amy Poehler, Kristen Wiig, cited Burnett as their inspiration. Ironically, they built their success on the very foundation she was once denied entry to. Then came 2023. NBC produced a grand special, Carol Burnett, 90 Years of Laughter Plays, Love, honoring her career. It was filmed at the Avalon Hollywood Theater, ironically just miles away from the SNL studio that had ignored her for decades. During the press tour, The Hollywood Reporter asked whether she regretted never hosting SNL. Burnett smiled gently and replied, "I guess they didn't need me. But I didn't need them either." By 1974, the show had reached its peak. 4 Emmys, soaring ratings, and a contract renewal from CBS that all but guaranteed immortality. That sentence was more than a response, it was reclamation. It closed a half-century wound with a grace sharper than any retaliation. Within hours, the hashtag #InviteCarol to SNL trended worldwide. Fans called it poetic justice. Others called it too late. During a later panel at the Paley Center for Media, she reflected, "Some people forget that kindness has its own kind of power. It does not shout, it endures." And perhaps that was the quiet victory she carried all along. Because in an industry where arrogance burns fast and fame fades faster, Carol Burnett never needed to win the argument. Yet beneath the applause, something fragile was starting to crack. She only needed to outlast it. In a town built on applause, silence can be the greatest revenge. Carol Burnett never raised her voice, never fought her critics in public, and never rewrote her history. She simply endured. Through the betrayals, the dismissals, and the half-whispered humiliations, she carried the same quiet strength that once made her the nation's laughter. Decades after those storms, she now sits where the noise can no longer reach her. 90 years old. Still luminous, still gracious. The woman who made the world laugh by showing its flaws now looks back and sees that every wound became part of her architecture. Harvey Korman taught her that kindness has limits. Crew members whispered about tension between Burnett and Korman. Joe Hamilton taught her that love without respect is only performance. Marlon Brando reminded her that boundaries are not negotiable. Cary revealed that dignity can disarm cruelty. And Lorne Michaels proved that exclusion cannot erase legacy. Each man, in his own way, tried to define her. None succeeded. When she stepped onto the stage for Carol Burnett, 90 Years of Laughter Plus, Love, the applause lasted nearly 5 minutes. Not out of nostalgia, but recognition. The industry that once doubted her had aged, she had transcended it. A journalist from The Atlantic later wrote, "Burnett's triumph is not in surviving Hollywood, but in outgrowing it." The first to notice was Bob Mackie, the show's legendary costume designer. In the end, she proved that empathy is not weakness, it is endurance. That humor, when anchored in humanity, outlasts every scandal and every slight. Her laughter was never the loudest. It was simply the last one still echoing after everyone else had left the stage. And somewhere beneath the quiet hum of studio lights fading one by one, Carol Burnett's voice still lingers on. Warm, steady, and resolute, you cannot control how the world treats you. But you can control how long you let it define you. The curtain falls. The audience stands. And as always before the screen fades to black ink, Carol waves one last time, smiling through the soft spotlight. Because even after a lifetime of betrayals, she never stopped doing what she did best. In his memoir, Even More Laughs, Mackie recalled that Korman had begun to snap at people, sometimes for no reason at all. She laughed first. She forgave later. And in the Indacha, she had the last laugh. What had begun as occasional irritability soon became visible resentment. In an industry often defined by ego and rivalry, Burnett became the exception, the woman who could make the entire country laugh without ever raising her voice. Some said Harvey felt overshadowed by Carol's growing fame. Others believed the long hours and endless rehearsals had drained him. But whatever the cause, the partnership that had once thrived on mutual respect began to collapse under the weight of ego and exhaustion. The breaking point arrived one April afternoon at CBS's Studio 33 in Los Angeles. Petula Clark, the British singer known for Downtown, had flown in to guest star. During rehearsal, a minor lighting error left Korman's face in shadow. He stopped mid-scene, tossed his script to the floor, and shouted, "After all these years, can't anyone get it right?" The room froze. Director Dave Powers tried to intervene, but Korman's frustration kept rising. Even Carol doesn't notice. Yet, behind the curtain of applause, there were years she never spoke about, years marked not by comedy, but by confrontation. He snapped a remark that landed like glass shattering in a cathedral. Burnett, seated quietly in the audience, stood. She did not shout. She did not gesture. She simply walked to the stage and said, in a voice calm enough to cut through chaos, "Harvey, I've had enough. If you can't respect everyone here, you don't need to be here." For a moment, there was only silence. Then, according to multiple witnesses, a microphone dropped. Korman stared at her, his anger suddenly drained, and walked off, set. No one followed. In her 90s, during an intimate conversation with Rolling Stone, she finally broke her silence. That afternoon, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner carried the headline, "Harvey Korman Leaves the Carol Burnett Show During Rehearsal." CBS refused to comment. Inside the studio, Burnett sat alone for nearly half an hour, staring at Korman's empty chair. One cameraman remembered her whispering, "I didn't want it to end this way, but he went too far." For 3 days, Hollywood buzzed. Was this the end of television's happiest duo? Entertainment reporters flooded CBS with calls. Variety published an anonymous source claiming that Burnett had reached her limit after months of friction. Fans wrote letters pleading for reconciliation. Then, on Wednesday morning, the studio phone rang. For the first time, America's kindest woman spoke candidly about the men she could never stand, the betrayals she could never fully forget, and the lessons she carried long after the laughter ended. It was Harvey. His voice was quiet, almost trembling. "I need to talk to Carol," he said. When Burnett answered, all he said was, "I was wrong. I want to come back." The next day, Korman returned to the set. In front of the cast and crew, he apologized to everyone, then directly to her. "I forgot why I started," he said. Burnett smiled softly, stepped forward, and embraced him. The studio erupted in applause, but something in the air had changed. The revelation stunned her fans. They would finish the show together, but the bond that had once defined them was now fractured beyond repair. In later years, Burnett rarely spoke about that afternoon. When she did, her tone was reflective rather than bitter. In a 1983 interview with Entertainment Tonight, she described Korman as the funniest man I ever knew and the one who gave me the biggest headaches. Her words carried no malice, only a kind of weary affection reserved for someone who once mattered deeply. Industry insiders dubbed it the Studio 33 blow-up, a story retold across CBS soundstages as a cautionary tale about ego, exhaustion, and the fragility of creative partnerships. Yet for Carol, the incident marked something deeper, the moment she learned that kindness had limits. From then on, she ran her set with quiet authority. No shouting, no chaos, but also no indulgence. "Respect first, laughter second," she told her team. Who could provoke bitterness in someone so universally beloved? Korman stayed with the Carol Burnett Show until 1977. When he left, there was no announcement, no tribute segment. Burnett simply closed the final taping with her signature wave and that familiar tune, "I'm so glad we had this time together." Offstage, she sat alone in her dressing room, staring at a bouquet of fading roses from Korman's farewell note. It read, simply, "Thank you for teaching me grace." Decades later, when asked whether she ever truly forgave him, Carol Burnett smiled faintly and said, "Forgiveness is easy. Forgetting isn't." It was a gentle sentence, but it carried the full weight of everything she never said again. If Harvey Korman represented the professional fracture in Carol Burnett's life, Joe Hamilton embodied the personal one. Together, they had built an empire of laughter.